Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. Buried Memories is out, so we're going to be talking about all the cards from Buried Memories. We have reviewed most of these in spoiler format already, so from the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. So we're going to be very brief with those particular cards as we talk about each one, but we are going to talk about each one and sort of like what these cards add to the meta in like overall setup, whether or not they're good in Expedition or Throne, and like what kind of decks they belong to, what kind of interesting stuff that we're going to be playing with. So there are a bunch of new cards. We have a couple of different hybrid cards. We got some new ones that we get to review. There's a set of 5 3-color cards to add to different lists. It doesn't look like there's any sort of like extra cards to make those 3-color cards more viable, so a lot of the cheaper ones that we were talking about are not going to be as good as a result, but I still think there's some pretty interesting stuff all in all. So let's do the full breakdown of every card in Buried Memories. Ready, set, go? Ready, set, go. Alright, so first off, Flash Fry, 2 damage, deal 3 damage to a unit, give it Void Bound, it loses its regen, and can't regenerate this turn. We just talked about this one. It is a really good card for removal. It does pretty much everything you want to do except kill sites. The loss of regen is really important because this is something that you can use to kill Mandrakes in red and green decks. This adds a lot to basically any red deck because red decks really need something to deal with Mandrakes at the moment, and a lot of the problems in dealing with Mandrakes are A, that red decks have a lot of cards that deal 2 damage against many 3 health units, and B, there's a lot of regen in Mandrakes, and Auto Tread, while a viable solution to that card, is too sort of specific and narrow a deck. This gives basically all Expedition lists something to do against regen cards. I think that Throne decks generally have enough answers to regen in the form of hard removal that they're not going to be too keen on grabbing this over Torches and Blazing Salvos and all the other like super powered cards, but it's still a pretty solid choice. So like I think that Expedition wise, probably, you know, like an A tier card. In Throne, you're going to see this like it's a C. It's not going to get played very often, but you might see it on occasion. Midchief Salus, Quick Draw, Amplify 2, play Song of War. We talked about this one a little bit previously. It is a 3-2 Quick Draw for 2, so it's already like pretty good in most mono red decks in Throne or Expedition. Solid stat line, good ability, got that extra soak so that it plays late. All of that is just something that's good in flexible decks in both Expedition and Throne. It is stronger in Expedition than it is in Throne, but it is a monocolored card in general, so in both of them, I'd say it's a card that's going to be very common in certain red decks, but is not going to be completely defining to those decks. It is notably a soldier in red, which there aren't that many of, so that's a nice little bonus to it, but it's also an Oni, which means that Oni decks in Throne are going to be pretty happy with it as well. I would say this card is not super high on power level, but it is a good, cheap, and solid option for decks that want to build something very early on in their collection. If you want to build a mono red deck, Midchief Salus is a great choice for that, and if you're picking up Buried Memories as one of your first campaigns, this is an awesome card for that type of aggro red. So super solid stuff there. Inferno Den. Your units have charge. Erica's agenda is bottoms up Inferno Dance and Conflagrate, and as expected, it does in fact play Erica Inferno Ring, the 6/5 flying quick draw with when it attacks double the strength of your other attacking units. Notably, Erica comes out with charge because of Inferno Den, so you get to immediately just swing in for what is probably going to be pretty close to lethal. This is a solid site. Conflagrate is really powerful. The health on this card is amazing, especially for a mono red site. Not that there are other mono red sites. The main issue with it is that Inferno Dance only defends it for 1 turn, and Conflagrate, while being very good at defending it, is not going to be like basically bottoms up is just not necessarily going to be like something that you play the first time that you play Inferno Den. So you're kind of restricted in what cards you're going to play in what order. It's almost always going to be Conflagrate, Inferno Dance, bottoms up, although you could potentially Inferno Dance for a single 1/1 elemental on the turn that it's played. But yeah, with Amplify being a primary focus of this, I think that the site is a little bit predictable in that respect. Other than that, it's a really powerful option, and it's not really a problem for red to be predictable as long as you are removing threats, dealing damage, and giving your stuff charge. So in Throne or Expedition, this card seems like a real winner. It's quite mid-range for red, so red mid-range has never been like super successful, but it is nonetheless a pretty popular choice, I would say, and I'm sure you're going to see it everywhere. Whether or not it's powerful is to be determined, but in general, sites with this much health at this little cost generally going to be very strong. I would rate this probably in an S tier in Expedition, and maybe an A in Throne. Alright, Impound. Kill a relic on the enemy player. Impound can't be stopped by Aegis, or draw a Sentinel from your void. Weirdly enough, we have a version of this card already. It's called Disjunction, and I think it's in another campaign. So this is a little bit more of retreading old ground than you will generally see. Disjunction is one that destroys an attachment or gains an attachment. Impound is something that specifically only addresses relics. The Can't Be Stopped by Aegis is kind of nice because it means you can market it as an option against basically transpose decks in Throne. I think that's actually a solid reason to pick up the card in a market. This card is almost never going to see play in a main board due to the fact that it really isn't very strong unless you are drawing Sentinels from your Void. I think the Can't Be Stopped by Aegis ability is probably relevant enough that this card sees a little bit of play, but yeah, it's only as a market sideboard card, which is like, I don't know, I feel like you need to rate those cards with like a little star on them. But like, yeah, it's like something that you'll probably see in the meta, so I'd give it like a B in Expedition and a C in Throne. Yeah, you may run this in a market in Throne, but there are so many market choices in Throne. I think the only reason to run this is if a transpose or like Aegis Relic meta is actually getting very, very popular. The drawing a Sentinel from your Void ability is lovely, but not like super important unless you're playing like Crown Sentinels. So yeah, not wildly powerful, but an interesting market choice. Logistics Expert. We played this card in Throne already in a Crown deck. It was such an immediate improvement on Crown's list that I have to suspect that this card is just like absolutely bonkers. We loved it in that deck. I think it's great in Throne. I think it's great in Expedition. It is just a better Initiative of the Sands, and Initiative of the Sands is already a card that is like kind of in that sort of S tier where it's just like played in a lot of different decks and it's defining for those decks. You need Initiative of the Sand to jump from 1 to 3. There are not that many ways to do that. Logistics Expert does that, but also allows you to play with the power that you have maximized on, and it allows you to have multiple Initiatives of the Sand, which means it defines a meta archetype. This card is just insanely strong in Throne or Expedition. I think it's probably the most powerful card in the mini set. Like, out of all these options, this is the one you're going to see the most of. The mono red Sight might see a lot of play. There are a couple of others that are going to see like a decent amount of play, like Smite, but this is one that just is going to be very defining for time for a long time to come until there are even more options at 1 to give that +1 maximum power. Ruse, War Beast, 5/6 summon, give a unit an Avoid Destiny and put it into your deck. Your other units that share a type with it get +1/+1. Giving a unit an Avoid Destiny is kind of a cool thing because then you can do interesting Crown shenanigans. Ruse's main deal is that it has a pretty decent stat line for the ability that it's granting. It does not give you any sort of immediate onboard impact, but it's very likely to hold onto the board for a decent amount of time. I think this card is probably ranked a little higher than it should be for most players, would be my guess. I think that it is, reasonably strong, but at 5 for a 5/6, it's not actually holding its own all that much, and giving a unit in your Void Destiny, while very, very useful, still means you have to pull the card from your deck and somehow get something out of it. And since it's anywhere in those like top 68 cards, that's something that, you're not always going to get to unless you are finding a specific way to draw that unit, like Rise to the Challenge, Celestial Omen. You cannot use Know When to Hold them because the Destiny will not trigger, or at least previously it has not. It's possible that they've changed it or something along those lines, and in that case my evaluation of this card does jump up. But it's hard to actually get something in a time deck that's going to grab that card when you want it to. So that makes it a little bit tricky to play. I still think the card is pretty powerful. It's like a B tier card in both formats. In Expedition, it's a little bit stronger because it's actually one of the meatier cards that you can play in time. It's fairly cheap, and the Destiny ability is just going to be a little more relevant, I think. Expedition is just going to have a lot more fun with it. And also, like, the extra bonus of sharing types with it and giving everything +1/+1 is pretty interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting, cool Johnny toys for this card. I wouldn't rate it particularly highly, but it is an incredibly fun card to play, so I wouldn't be surprised if you see it in a lot of decks. So yeah, that puts it in like a B tier for me. Jetpack. Once per turn, you can give a unit, pay 2 to give one of your units flying this turn. If it hits the enemy player, they can't play spells into your next turn. After the third use, sacrifice Jetpack. This card makes me, like, irritated on just every possible level. I don't like it. So, like, it gives units flying, which is a useful thing to do. It's Injustice, so, like, that's a weird thing to do already. It has a... Players can't play spells, which is something that you really don't want to happen, but like, if that does happen, you're really, really irritated because then you can't play spells for a turn. There's a timer on it, though, so griefing with it does have a limit unless you play more. And, like, so, like, that kind of sort of restriction on a card where you are like basically like making it so that you just have to play the card multiple times to get the benefits off of it. There's a lot of problems with this. Like, one is that like it actually does make the card even less fun to play against when you see multiple jetpacks in a row. If you're like all locked out of spells and then your opponent just plays like their 4th turn jetpack after locking you out of the first 3 turns of spells, then like that is just like an infuriating like game quitting moment. Like, you do not want to see that happen. It's just so frustrating to see. And also, this is a card that is like making other units like fly, which is just like, yeah, that's not a super. It can be a fun mechanic, but like, oh man, there's a lot of stuff going on there. On the other hand, this card is just really frustrating to play, like on the side that if you actually have it, because it costs a decent amount. It doesn't do anything on the turn it's played unless you pay an additional 2. You have to pay 2 to get flying, which is, I mean, that's an okay effect. That's like a wind cloak type effect, but you're playing this in Expedition or Throne, so you know, like, that's kind of crazy. And then like once you start attacking in with it, players can play spells to counter out your ability. So like if you're actually investing in the card, you're probably going to get punished for it, which, you know, is probably a reason not to play it. I think that if you actually successfully pull off Jetpack in a way that is meta reliable, it's an incredibly infuriating card to play against. But I also think that Jetpack is a trap and is a very bad card. No points. This card is just awful on like a number of different levels. It's not very powerful, and if it were powerful, I mean, I would hate it even more. So yeah, I'm just, not into this one. It's also like weirdly off color in design. It doesn't feel particularly right for a green card, apart from being very anti-fun, which is pretty common for green cards, but like still not a part of green's design that I love. So yeah, I award you no points. Let's go on to the next one. But like, this is like maybe a C card in power level. Smite. Kill a unit with different strength and current health. Yeah, this card's super good. It's an Annihilate, but you can do a lot of other good things with it. We talked about this a lot in the spoiler breakdown, but the basic idea is that if you have like fast spell Annihilate in green, that's really, really solid. I have some grievances about like the card's like different strength and current health thing being something that kind of punishes cards that are a bit more unique and interesting. As opposed to like Annihilate, which is a card that was very popular for punishing cards that were very common. I think that this is something that like, yeah, overall it's just like fine for Justice to have. It's definitely a good design. It's definitely like an S tier card, I think, in both formats. It's very likely that you're going to see a lot of this card, and it's not like so unpleasant or uninteresting that you're not going to have a lot of fun with it. I think the ability to like mess with people's current health to cause that thing to be triggered, basically like by attacking into units or by dealing like little pings, that kind of thing. That's a really interesting play pattern, and there's a strong reason to play with it. I just don't, like, I'm not in love with the card, but yeah, it's an S tier card. It's a pretty good design overall, and like, by and large, I certainly don't have major objections to it. Fort Smasher, 3 costs 3/3. When Fort Smasher hits the enemy player, play a unit with the cost 3 or less from the top 3 cards of your deck, discard the rest. This is a lot of good things on a Sentinel. 3/3 stat line for 3 is pretty reasonable. The hit is basically just right. Cost 3 or less from the top 3 cards of your deck is pretty hard to pull off. You have to play fairly cheap Sentinels or fairly cheap other types of cards to get the best benefit from this. And this also like precludes some like Warcry options and other things that you might be doing at 3. I don't know if the card is insanely powerful, but I do think that actually like playing it down in a basic aggro like Rakano-ish shell means that you are getting benefits from Warcry cards faster and just doing a lot more like interesting cheap things. This is a pretty good design. It's a lot of fun to play with. It's a great Sentinel. It's a great cheap Sentinel in green, which means that you can build better green Sentinels in general. So I think it's going to belong in some Expedition decks. It's probably not going to see too much Throne play just because it doesn't have like anything extra for being a Throne card, and like Throne cards just have like a really high bar to clear overall. But I would say it's still like at least a C in Throne and like a B or an A in Expedition. In Expedition, this card is just like pretty well statted and has an amazing on-hit effect, so getting through with it through like Conflagrates and Blazing Salvos and other sort of Rakano stuff, gonna be a pretty powerful time. And yeah, I think like green, red, yellow Sentinels could happily take another 3-cost Sentinel. There's a lot of different cards that play around with Sentinels that are gonna be really happy to have this card in their deck. So solid stuff, really good design, and yeah, decently powerful card. Refraction. Play a copy of an attacking enemy unit, sacrifice it at the end of the turn. It's a removal spell that also copies units, which is potentially like very, very good. If somebody's attacking you with a 4/4 or a 3/4 or something like that, you Refraction, you get a summon effect off of the unit that attacked you, and then you also manage to trade units as well. It doesn't work on units that have less health than strength, but overall this is pretty strong removal for a blue deck. It is fairly dangerous copy effects. I would say that it's a pretty powerful card. I would probably rank it like maybe A in Expedition and B in Throne. There may be a lot of different situations where you're happy to have a copy of an attacking enemy unit, but also like your opponent gets to control this pretty well, and so if it's actually popular in the meta, then there are a lot of things that allow it to get nullified. I think that at that point it drops off a lot, so this is a great surprise to have in your deck, but it's not an amazing card to have as like a meta-defining card, so it kind of falls in like the B to C tier just because like once people are aware of it, it's not nearly as powerful as when people aren't aware of it. It is still a really interesting trick and a lot of fun to play with, so some cool stuff going on there. Bracers of the Subdual. At the start of your turn, sacrifice Bracers of the Subdual to draw a card with for each different health among your units. At the end of that turn, play a beast with +1/+1 for each card that you played. This is a lot of good things to get. If you actually get it. It is notably a 4-cost relic that only triggers at the start of your turn, and then like also at the end of your turn after you have played it. So it's like you have to wait 2 turns to get a beast, and then you also have to wait quite a few turns to draw cards, which is like, yeah, there's a lot of things happening here that are making it very slow to set up. And then, amongst other things, you also give your opponent a full turn to mess with your units and make sure that they either have equal health or don't exist anymore. So there's a lot of ways that this could potentially just do nothing. Like Bracers of Subdual into a Harsh Rule is just, you've wasted a relic and your opponent's stuff is destroyed. I think this card is like strictly in like the D to F area. If you actually get it running with all of the different things that you're trying to do, mainly getting different health on a bunch of units and then playing down the relic, you probably should have already had a strategy that wins the game at that point. So like, yeah, this is an interesting, fun Johnny card, but like, I don't think that there's a super powerful strategy to take here that is better than a lot of the other things that Primal is already doing, such as like doing like blue influence to draw cards or things like that. It could be good in Expedition if you actually get like the right type of thing off of it. Throne has many better card draw engines that are probably not nearly as slow and like also just play a little better. Notably a transpose market card, so that's something to play about it. But yeah, I think this is like a D or an F in both Expedition and Throne. Maybe a D in Expedition and an F in Throne. I also just like, yeah, I don't know, they keep pushing this like different health among your units thing, and it keeps being not very much of a thing because a lot of units get removed pretty quickly when you're trying to play around with this ability. If this were on a unit and then the unit like sacrificed itself at the start of its turn, it actually might be a little bit more interesting because you'd automatically get the card draw, and then you'd also like be able to replace the unit with a beast or something along those lines. It would be like a little bit, and it would also be a little more interactive. I don't know, there's a lot of like potential things that could have like been done with this to make it a little bit more interesting, but overall like the design on it doesn't really appeal to me, and I think that the power level of it is rightfully pretty low, even though this can draw you a lot of cards and then play a very big beast at the end of it, all of which are good things for blue to do. Evolving Ulzeal. Flying regen. When Evolving Ulzeal hits the enemy player, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Summon, you may transform a relic or sight into a 4/1 soldier that can't block. So notably allows you to like turn your relics into weird aggro things, which is probably not what you're doing. You're probably using this to turn a speaking circle into a soldier, which seems perfectly reasonable as far as things go. It is a you may ability, and like honestly, this is a card that you may not play for the summon effect. It is a 5/3 flying regen in blue. That is a pretty decent aggressive stat line. The hits ability really benefits aggressive plays as well. So if you're trying to play with like just a fairly aggressive like regen deck, then this is something that can really kind of push a lot of damage. I think this is a good card in Expedition, probably in the B to A tier. In Throne, it's like harder to use. I mean, it's just like 3 health is very little, and the card can certainly die to a lot of stuff without actually getting any benefits. But the answer to Sights is very nice, so I could see this being played and thrown at like a, I put it like a C or a D. It's not terribly common, but it is something that sees like a decent amount of play at the very least. So yeah, this is a really, really good Expedition card, but in Throne, not so much. Dark Purveyor. The first time you deal spell damage each turn, play a 1/1 Grenamenter. Okay. Summon, give one of your other units +1 strength for each unit in your void. So you get a little healing sacrifice option for whenever you are playing spells, which is pretty decent. But I would say that mostly the thing that's really nice about this card is its stat line. 4-cost 5/3 is not too bad in Expedition, and the summon, give one of your other units +1 strength for each unit in your void, actually gives one of your flyers or unblockable units, or maybe like Dark Wisps, something along those lines, a pretty big boost to the point where it can trade with other cards. So this is a card that has some pretty good onboard impact and also gets you a small like unit that heals every time you are playing spells that deal damage. And like Stone Scar aggressive options, that doesn't seem like a terrible, terrible thing. I don't think that either of its abilities have a lot of impact, but I think combined with its like fairly okay stat line, this is a card that does a decent amount in Expedition. In Throne, I mean, like, I think that, like, there's just too much going on in Stone Scar Sacrifice already that's, like, pretty full of shenanigans. Like, once you're into, like, Shrine to Carvet level stuff, you're probably not playing Dark Purveyor. So, it's possible that this gets played in Throne, but I think it's more like a D in Throne and a to B in Expedition. All right, next up, Smugglers Toll. When you take damage on your turn, deal 3 damage to the cursed player. Kind of interesting. It doesn't trigger on multiple damage triggers, but it is potentially a way to get an infinite combo or some sort of like massive damage combo. I would rank this card pretty low because like I think you are specifically looking for that combo, but there is potentially some deck that abuses it. It's like a solid C in both Throne and Expedition. I think both potentially have the ability to abuse it. Expedition has the advantage of there being a lower power level when you're trying for it, and Throne has the advantage of having more cards to actually get whatever it is that you want to go off. In either case, though, you are playing a 4-cost relic to get a combo going, and that is something that is relatively slow to do and may not instantly trigger in the way that you want it to. If you can instantly trigger into an infinite combo, this card goes up in value a little bit, but like I said, like it basically just depends on whether or not that one combo deck is any good. If you're playing this card in like just a main board, like I'm taking a little bit of damage to do other things type deck, it's okay, but that's a very specific use case. So yeah, this card ranks at like a C for me. Like we'll examine further if and when we find a deck that plays with it. Higher Muscle. When one of your units with 2 strength or less attacks, deal 1 damage to the enemy player. Valkyrie Warp, Lifesteal. So pretty good on-board mechanic. When you play it, you immediately get to attack with some units with 2 strength or less, and then get some extra damage out of it. It also has Valkyrie Warp, so you will get some life gain out of it if those units with 2 strength or less are Valkyries, which there are quite a few small flying Valkyries in Shadow, and that's potentially something that you can actually get some value out of. I think this would have been a really interesting card in draft. Like, it's kind of fun with Maimed Watchwing, it's kind of fun with Bastion Boltcrafter. Those are both commons in the draft format. I'm a little sad that this card didn't make it over to the like main board pack. In Expedition, the stat line's fine and the lifesteal is a good bonus, so it's probably okay. I don't see this card being played in Throne very much because the damage dealing for life gain, while nice, also requires you to have Valkyries in Shadow, which is a relatively new concept for Throne and Expedition. I think there just aren't enough good Valkyries in Throne in Shadow for this to be like a big thing, and like if you're doing a 2 or less attacks type setup where you're dealing a bunch of extra damage to the enemy player, you're probably doing, again, like something like Shrine to Carvet, which is already very high power level and doesn't need a 5-cost Giant Rogue. Giant Rogue is a really cool set of keywords, though. Let's hope that comes into play at some point. All right, Volk the Auto Forge. We've talked about this one before, but a 5/3 Endurance Overwhelm with an Entomb ability that allows you to play the card back for a little bit cheaper. Let's see if can we show Volks Heart here? All right, that's not gonna shift for me, but yeah, Volks Heart is of course a pay 3, sacrifice Volks Heart and another relic to play Volk from the Void with +2/+2. So it becomes a 7/5, then a 9/8, basically just keeps getting bigger and bigger every time you sack a relic to bring the card back, which is a reasonable use of the card. Yeah, this card has good enough stats to be good in Throne or Expedition. In Expedition, I would say it is an A to S tier card. In Throne, it is something that is going to see a little less play, but I mean, red, yellow, green aggro can certainly use it, and it's probably going to be an A or a B in there. So, seems solid enough. Really, really good power level. The Entomb ability is not something I'm going to play a lot of, but it being both a Sentinel and Explorer and a Relic, all three of those things in one go means that it's very likely to see some play in Sentinel, Relic, and Explorer decks. So if those ever become popular in Throne, this card goes up a little bit in value. But I think overall it's like something like a B in Throne, but it's an amazing card in Expedition. Just really well statted, does everything you want to do in the right colors. So definitely defines this color trio in Expedition. Dichro Conqueror. We talked about this one in the spoiler breakdown. I think that a 3/5 stat line with charge is not bad for pressure, but is also not incredibly pressuring. And the fact that each enemy unit is getting -1/-1 only until your next turn means this card has relatively limited onboard impact for its health. 6 for a 5 health flyer does mean you get something sticky that can actually push, so I'd give this like a B in Expedition. In Throne, I just don't think you play it. There's plenty of cool Valkyries to play in Throne, and a lot of them are going to do a little bit more than this. Like, compare it to Rezon Greatbow Master, which is just a card that removes a particularly big threat from the game, gives you potentially some life back, and also has like an incredible amount of pressure. Yeah, that's a pretty big deal, and like this card is 3 different colors for what you're trying to set up, so you have to really be wanting to play it in order to put it into a deck. That makes it like a C or a D in Throne. I just don't think it plays that much. In Expedition, this is an answer to Granite Den, and Granite Den aren't a huge threat, so it's there, but I think it's like a B or a C. Gren, Iron Martyr, 1/1, can't block, Entomb, draw a card, your other Granite Den get a bonus, and you increase the damage of each spell in your hand by 1. If there seems to be a pretty serious push to make Granite Den and spell damage work. This is probably not the card that makes it happen. I think it's like a B or a C in Expedition. It's pretty bad in Throne. In Throne, you do have the ability to fix for it a little better, so like that makes it kind of nice because it is a like Dark Wisp type effect that you're going to be combusting pretty commonly. And in that case, you actually get like a nice bonus to your Granite Den, and you get a nice bonus to your spell damage, both of which are nice things to have. But like, yeah, this is a lot for a card that doesn't really do very much. If the card could block, then it would be a lot more powerful. But since it can't block, I think that sacrificing it is pretty difficult, and it's not like the kind of card that you want to play with Devour and a lot of the other types of setups that these types of decks want to play with. So yeah, Granite Den and Cultist is a useful type. Let's hope that that does something, but probably not a Throne card. Expedition-wise, it belongs in some decks, but it's more like a C or a B. Ethos, Reach Captain. Probably don't see this card too much in Throne, just because like stunning, 2/2 weapons, and random sigils are all like just average things to do in Throne. In Expedition, this is perfectly fine because it sets up soldier aggro and it sets up soldier stun stuff with tactical superiority and a wide variety of other like interesting amplify effects. There's a lot of soldiers that specifically kill stunned units, which means that Ethos is a really great enabler for a 3-color soldier deck. That puts it in like the B to A tier for me. I think that there's likely to be a soldier there that really, really wants to play this type of stuff. Playing that same deck in Throne, however, is going after a particular tribal theme in a format that's a lot higher power, so that puts Ethos like more of a C or a D in Throne. You're the Drifting Song. What a fun crown card. We played with it quite a bit. I think it's a solid like B to C in Expedition and a B to C in Throne. I am, however, really enjoying playing with it, and it's a ton of fun. So, yeah, I'd give it like a B in both at the moment. It's a little too expensive for what it wants to do, but by and large, that's not really preventing it from doing a lot of extremely fun things. We will probably be releasing some crown highlights very shortly with You're the Drifting Song, and showing off how ridiculous this card can get when you're playing it as like the sort of top end of a crown deck, or cheating it out with other like sort of setups. The card just kills people if it stays on board for longer than a turn. A 9/8 flying endurance quick draw is something that is going to stabilize you in a number of different ways that you're very happy to do, and there's a lot of ways to give it lifesteal as well, which is the only thing that it's missing. So yeah, solid Mandrake Bard, but like a B tier card, definitely not going to like completely define the meta in any way. House Alliance. It's a nice 5-color card, so I think it's like a B or an A in Throne. I don't know if there's a reason to play 5 color Expedition, so I'd actually give it like a D or an F in that. It is just not a card that really does much for Expedition because there's not a reason to play 5 color in Expedition. Beacon of the Reach is the only card I can think of that kind of wants it. And yeah, Beacon will play 4 copies of it, but it's already a depleted card most of the time in those decks, and once it is undepleted, you're probably already at 5 colors and you're probably already winning. So eh. In any case, once you have like all of that, you can do whatever you want. You can get additional influence for your cards and sort of enable some interesting 5 color options. But yeah, this card is like C tier in Expedition. Going to 5 colors is actually like actively bad in Expedition. In Throne, this is a lot more fun because 5 color options become like a lot wider. I do think that a Beacon of the Reach deck is probably going to play this, and that might raise my estimation of it a little bit. Might of the Bastion. Grenadins deal 3 damage, Mandrakes draw a card, Sentinels play power cards, Soldiers get +1/+1, Valkyries get 5 armor. This is like pretty solidly like in the D or C tier. The 3 damage plus draw a card off Granite Mandrakes is the primary reason I think to play this. Playing in Sentinels and Soldiers, getting power cards and +1/+1 bonuses is nice, but not necessarily worth 4. And also like having to establish a board presence. In Valkyries, getting extra armor is just almost pointless, and you're never going to pair Valkyries with Soldiers or Sentinels that often, or very likely with Grenadins or Mandrakes. I can see maybe like Valkyrie Grenadin, where you have like a relic weapon set up and you're also playing some of the small Grenadins to set up that kind of stuff. But like basically, it's very hard to get at least 3 relevant tribes down, and once you have 3 relevant tribes down, that's probably when the card is really sort of worth the most. If you're getting 2 relevant tribes off of it, usually getting a decent deal. I mean, paying 4 to deal 3 damage and draw a card is pretty nice, but because there are some very specific requirements for the card, I don't think it's super high in power level. I think it's like in the C tier, but if you can actually get the right tribal stuff going off, then yeah, it definitely gets a lot more powerful as time goes on. But yeah, triggering all of those abilities at the same time is not that great. If you have all 5, you don't get like a significant benefit from it. So as far as colorless cards go, it's perfectly well costed for what it's doing, and it's also not going to like rule the colorless meta, which I appreciate because yeah, like that would be not so much fun. In an all colorless deck, there are, I believe, colorless Soldiers, there is a colorless Valkyrie, there is a colorless Grenadin, there may be a colorless Sentinel, I can't really think of one, and there is a colorless Mandrake. So you could play an all colorless deck and have some fun with this as well, but this is definitely not like the most powerful colorless card by any means. It's just something that gets you like a couple of decent effects, and so like I would rank it pretty low as far as the overall power level of it. All right, that is all the cards in the current set, or the current mini set. As you can see, there's a lot of really good stuff for like Sentinels, red decks, anything that's doing like really, really aggressive stuff. We have like some pretty good meta-defining new cards like Smite and Logistics Expert that are good reasons to pick up the set for Throne, and we have some other fun stuff that's just really worth playing with, like Inferno Den, Ruse War Beast, and Evolving Ulziel, all of which will probably define some interesting archetypes. I think that like the 3-color cards add a bit of interest to Expedition, but probably don't push anything insane in Throne, with the exception of Volk the Autoforge. Dark Purveyor provides like a pretty interesting new archetype in Shadow, and potentially pushes something interesting there. The rest of the cards are unlikely to have a lot of meta impact. Jury's out on Jetpack, I guess, or Brazers of the Subdual, like making some form of deck, but most likely like you're in it for cards like Flash Fry, which are simple utility cards that'll be good for your cheap decks. You're in it for a couple of specific decks with Volk and certain other stuff. This is a mini set that I would pick up probably in the middle of the pack, but if I'm looking for in particular cheap Oni or Soldiers, that's something that I'd go after as in terms of buying this set early on. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff, and if you're trying to get some cool new Expedition cards, probably worth the pickup. I think overall there's a decent amount of good rated cards in here, and there's a decent amount of interesting Johnny cards to play with. So fun stuff all in all. That's it for this Eternal card breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Pojo. As always, I am on Patreon, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and we'll see you all next time. Cheers.